Lately, I've had anime directors on the brain. Not too long ago, I made an entire 30-minute video about the latest One Piece openings director, and it got me thinking about directors in anime overall right now that are not only on the rise, but are also just damn good at what they do, and are putting out some of the best media that you can watch seasonally right now. And there's one name in particular that kept popping up in my head, one name that has been making huge waves in anime over the past few years, someone who has directed back-to-back bangers that even normal people are recognizing as standouts within the entire industry. Direction in anime is actually something that I find to be incredibly underappreciated. You can show a casual viewer great animation, and they'll usually understand why what they're looking at is great. But direction is almost an unsung talent in anime because there's a lot of seen and unseen qualities to it. Yeah, direction plays a part in that crazy animation that you just witnessed, but direction is also a lot bigger than that. It determines why that animation was even there in the first place. It determines who was even animating that at all. It determines everything from a conceptual point of view, and there's only a small few who can be given that amount of creative control over a project, rein it in with their overall vision, and make sure that every component in the making is operating at their absolute best. Keiichiro Saito is one such person, and with his latest anime series Frieren Beyond Journey's End, I don't think many people would disagree. Frieren is good. Can I say that? Can I say that the #1 rated anime on my anime list is in fact good? Because there is a lot of things that you can point to that make it good. Immediately, I think of the godlike Evan Call soundtrack. I think of the truly masterful production that excels in almost every department. I think of the sheer confidence in this story that it's willing to spend large amounts of episodes in these very low-key and slow-paced storylines. There's a lot of things that this anime has going for it, but beyond any of those one thing specifically, I genuinely think it's the direction of Keiichiro Saito that is not only the reason why any of those things happened in the first place, but it's also what brought them all together into one singular vision. And that's really what stands out to me about Frieren so far. It feels like a very complete production and vision. Everything is feeding into each other in a way that makes sense. One example that I can think of off the top of my head is, you know that godlike Evan Call soundtrack that I just mentioned? Well, the interesting thing about that soundtrack is that they were actually able to pre-compose that music for its 2-hour debut. They were able to write and score the soundtrack to specific scenes very early in the production. That doesn't usually happen in TV anime, and as a result, it led to these really deliberately crafted and scored moments that you rarely see outside of theatrical level productions. Even past that original debut, the series has still had individual moments that are pre-scored just to elevate a climax or important scene. If you've been watching the series and you're wondering why the music stands out so much in so many of these episodes, that is part of the reason. I don't know how healthy the production actually is, but it's very evident how well Keiichiro Saito handles this role of leadership, how well he plans ahead with the resources he's given, and how well he brings everything together. So the real question is, where does somebody like this come from? It's always so interesting to me when a huge talent in anime basically becomes well known and established overnight. And it's something most people don't even really think about until they actually see these people in these big directorial positions. But if you look at any director in the anime industry, before they were helming these big overarching projects, you can almost certainly find them directing individual episodes. Do me a favor and look up any of your favorite directors or even just people that you know from your favorite series. And beyond anything that you actually know them for, what you will find is probably smaller stuff in places that you never expected. One name that I can think of is Toshimasa Ishii. This guy's pretty well known now for his directorial debut on 86, a great great series that aired not too long ago, but he actually has a long history of directing really great episodes for A1 in shows like Erased, Grand Blue Fantasy, and even something like Interviews with Monster Girls. Now, that might sound like a kind of bizarre array of work, but it's really not even scratching the surface of what these people work on in the histories of their careers. The notable people within this industry always have really interesting catalogs that wrap and weave in ways that you wouldn't expect. And it's these histories and these smaller stepping stones in their careers where you ironically end up seeing these directors in their purest, most concentrated forms. And I bring all of this up because I think it's the best place to start when talking about Keiichiro Saito's work. Saito has a very clear voice. You can hear it so loudly in the anime that he's directed so far, but I think that voice might be even louder and even more distinct when you look back at the individual episodes that he's directed for other people's projects. Yama no Susume, the 2019 Boogie Pop, even the Idolmaster Side M. That's right, the trend of literally every talented modern figure in anime working on Idolmaster never ends. However, I would say the most distinct and personal work of Saito's before he worked on Bocchi the Rock was an individual episode on the Shingo Natsume-led anime series called Sunny Boy. Sunny Boy is already an interesting anime because it really does feel like a series entirely driven by the creators making it. There's no executive meddling, there's no pandering to market, it is just sheer, unadulterated artistic vision, for all of the good and the bad that comes with that. And because it's that kind of project, it means that the team underneath Natsume also had a lot more say than usual in what these episodes actually ended up becoming. Saito's episode 8, Laughing Dog, is not only my favorite episode in the series, but it's maybe the strongest example of that creator intent being let absolutely loose. Saito takes what is probably the most isolated story that exists within the series and turns it into a deeply unsettling and melancholic vignette about the life and relationship one of its characters had in the past. To this day, it may still be the clearest look into who Saito is as a director, and even outside of the scope of Sunny Boy, I would recommend anyone watch it just for that standalone experience itself. The smaller stepping stones are often where you see these directors' voices the loudest. But why is that? Why does a smaller position show off these creators more prominently than being in charge of an entire series? Well, the answer to that lies in the question itself. When you're in charge of an entire series, it's naturally a much more collaborative process. You're dealing with so many more variables and so many more voices to take into consideration that the production analogy becomes less akin to an author writing a book or an artist making a painting, and more along the lines of a captain steering a gigantic boat. The captain is the one in charge, they do have the final word, but there's also a lot of other big positions around the boat that need filling as well. And balancing those things, balancing all of that with skilled people who are naturally going to have their own ways of doing things, is also part of a director's job. You already just saw this with Shingo Natsume. Sunny Boy is still very much a Shingo Natsume series, a Shingo Natsume vision, but he still gave Saito a lot of free rein to convey what he wanted to with that Sunny Boy episode. Likewise, Saito himself says in one of his interviews that episode directors end up coming to him with all kinds of ideas, and he does his best to accept as many as he can while still maintaining the overall vision that he has for the project. And I bring up all of these concepts, I bring up all of these smaller works of his, because I think it's an interesting contrast looking at his style through arguably its most distinct and identifiable, and then seeing how that style translates into larger projects and seeing how other people express themselves through his work as well. One of the most interesting things that I learned about Saito through his interviews and through these pieces on Sakuga is that he really doesn't care for big, over-the-top, bombastic pieces of work. That's just not the style of anime that he wants to make, and he's even declined projects in the past just because they didn't align with those personal tastes. Even when you look back at the individual episodes of anime that he's directed, they all share a quality of thoughtfulness and introspection. They're quiet, they're character-oriented. The obvious example is his work on Sunny Boy Episode 8, but even among his other work, it's just a quality of his that's always been pretty apparent. And the reason why it's so interesting to me is because of how that reflects in these two larger projects that he's handled since then, Bocchi the Rock and Frieren. These two might not seem that similar on the surface, but they share a really interesting connection when it comes to this preference Saito has toward his work. Let's start with Bocchi the Rock, because I don't know about you guys, one of the first things that I think of when I think of Bocchi the Rock is over the top. I think bombastic. I literally called this adaptation absurd. It's an anime that revels in so many weird and wacky ideas to convey the comedy in the story, and it does it at its own volition. Most of the crazy stuff that you see in Bocchi the Rock wasn't even in the source material. So what's up with that? Did Saito just lie about not liking over-the-top projects? Well, I don't think so. You have to keep in mind that very rarely in the industry are you going to get everything that you want. And to me, it's a lot more likely that Saito found something in Bocchi the Rock that he connected with, and he assembled this crazy team of people underneath him who could elevate it. Take a look at the staff interviews for Bocchi the Rock, and you'll see Keiichiro Saito specifically zone in on the core of Bocchi that resonated with him. The fact that this is a coming-of-age drama about Bocchi growing out of her shell and learning to connect and put herself out there. He even thinks of the absurd comedy and over-the-top gags as a way of isolating those more character-oriented, intimate moments and making them stand out. And not only did he completely succeed in this, in my opinion, but you also see where his team mentality starts showing its strengths. He did come up with a lot of the absurd qualities in Bocchi himself, but he also took a lot of ideas from the episode directors underneath him, and it's one of the reasons why this series is as insane as it is. So that kind of leads us to now. Frieren Beyond Journey's End feels like it's being made with that same mentality and same approach that Bocchi the Rock was. I mean, you have to keep in mind that Frieren was literally in pre-production at the same time as Bocchi the Rock was being made. However, if Bocchi the Rock was Saito finding a core to connect to within a relatively over-the-top series, then I would say Frieren is like the inverse of that. It's a relatively tranquil series that has moments and sequences of craziness interspersed. It's not hard to imagine which part of Frieren appealed to Saito more, but again, this is why he assembles these teams the way that he does. People who are more equipped and have bigger preferences to handling those bigger sequences of action and can elevate them in their own way. However, even this side of Frieren I find interesting because it still feels very informed by Saito's overall vision. It's not like you're watching Frieren for its quiet, melancholic moments and then just get thrown off when you reach its action. The two sides of the series are very compatible with each other. If there's one way that I would describe the action in Frieren, it would be elegant. The action feels very different to me than the action you see in other anime. It's always very readable, it involves magic, so rarely are characters moving around the scene a lot. The presentation of the magic always blends gracefully with the overall aesthetic of the series. It's just such a cohesive vision overall, and it only impresses me more and more every time we see some new magic visually expressed in such creative ways, and it always fits the vibe of the series. So overall, if you take one thing from this video, it should probably be that Keiichiro Saito is an absolute legend. But if you take another thing from this video, I would say it should be the fact that assembling teams, managing resources, and just channeling a vision from the voices of many people are all incredibly valuable skills to have as a director. It's not just about making things look good. It's not about just being a one-man god who imposes their singular vision on the world. There's many more variables and many more approaches to being a good director, and I hope I could illustrate that in some way here. A huge shout out to the incredible resources on Sakuga blog. The interviews they translate and the write-ups that Kevin makes are incredibly informative, and I highly recommend checking out their website for a much deeper look into all of the things that I talked about here. Join the Discord server in the description below, subscribe for future videos. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.